All right. Hi, everybody. I'm Warlord Magni. Thanks for coming, and welcome to the next installment on my Newb to Warlord series. Today, I'm going to talk about fighting to win versus fighting to learn. So, I guess first off, I want to start off with saying, like, fighting to win versus fighting to learn, these don't have to be mutually exclusive things. You can learn and fight to learn and fight to win at the same exact time. But for the context of like this class, and I think for the broader fighting community, especially for those that are trying to like climb to Warlord or just get better in general, um, learning will be more in the context of building new skills and getting better, right? Being able to get fighting, using fighting as a medium to put new things in your toolbox and knowing how to use them. Okay. Um, but also, I guess just putting in a definition wise, like fighting to win, I would say that is when you're trying to use your skills to maximize your probability of success. Okay. And I like to think about fighting to win as really stress testing all of your tools and all of your skills at its capacity in real time, against the strongest opponents or against whatever opponent you're facing. Okay. So I think really, how do you learn through fighting? Um, and I think there's multiple ways of learning, right? Different skills. You can do drills, you can do conceptualizing like within your head and visualizing concepts, but really how do we learn through the medium of fighting and sparring itself? Okay. And so this is also how I built the majority of my skills. Like as I climbed for Warlord, I wasn't doing a bunch of drills. I did a lot of conceptualization in my free time or like on my off time, thinking about like, right, this is how I throw a wrap or this is how I throw money or like whatever combo. But then when I was at park, that's where I was really like solidifying those skills and those concepts. Um, so if anything, this is like kind of a true and tried method, at least for me. But everybody is different, right? Everybody learns differently, and you got to kind of take this at your own pace and take what you can out of this. So what you're going to learn and how you're going to learn fighting concepts in sparring is going to depend a little bit on what you're trying to learn itself, right? So there could be existing tools or like concepts that you're trying to work on. Say, like, how do I throw a dark side, or how do I throw money, or these like certain shots, right? Or how do I fight in A range, or how do I do like work on reading assessment, these sort of things. If you know about it and you kind of already understand the perspective or like the point, that's one different thing. Whereas you can also try to learn entirely new skills by watching other people fight or fighting entirely new people as well, and like trying to pick new things out of that fight itself. Those are two separate things. And so I'm going to go through those independently, right? So working on an existing or building up a desired skill that you have already identified, I think this is kind of the easiest thing. And so this is what I'll mostly focus on throughout this class, right? So first off, I would say if we're going to talk about learning how to dark side, right? The dark side is, so everybody knows, it's this shot. Boom, right? Dark side. How do I do that? So first off, you kind of need to have at least a baseline knowledge of what that shot is or what that concept is, right? What are the mechanics of that shot? I would also recommend before you go into sparring with like trying to do dark sides, drill it out first, right? Like if I'm fighting somebody and I've, seen a shot on YouTube or whatever, it's like, oh, that's cool, I want to try that. I'm going to work through that in my head as well as like drill out the basic motions slower, like slow, and then faster, and then like with actual equipment. And then that's what I'll like, once I have a decent understanding of what I'm doing there, that's when I'm actually going to fight an opponent and try to do it, right? Or else, if you just try to do that, I mean, like, yeah, it may work, but you're not going to be very effective at it, right? You're just going to be like fumbling around until you kind of figure it out. So doing a little bit of homework on the front end will really help you learn. Also, like, you want to kind of see how these, whatever you're trying to learn, like, fits into your fighting style and how you can use it in different ways, right? So, Nameless, if you could come here. So, let's go this way. So if I'm going to talk about like a dark side, right? The dark side I can throw here. I can throw high. If I have my punch, I can like throw like this, right? These are all different sort of ways that I could fit this one style of shot into my fighting style, right? And so learning how, like, you kind of have to ask yourself, like, how am I going to do this in different ways? And like, what are the scenarios that this actually works out, right? The dark side is the perfect counter to a high cross, right? So you throw the high cross, boom! I get the arm, I get the body, I kill, I win. Right? But so knowing that, how do I kind of get them to throw that high cross? How does my opponent respond? And also, every opponent's going to be a little bit different. Okay. Let's see. All right. Thanks. You can sit down for a little bit. Okay, so those are sort of things that you have to kind of think about when you're working on things that you already kind of know what you want to work on. But when you're trying to now pick out new fights, right? Or like you're fighting somebody new from either a new location, a new warlord, a new whomever, right? And you see something that they're doing cool, or you're consistently dying to something, right? And you're now trying to figure out what they're doing and how you can use that. Like, I like to mimic people, so I've kind of developed an entire skill set in doing this. It's always great when, you know, somebody like kills me with a cool shot, and I'm like, huh, that was cool. I'm now gonna get you with the same thing, and then you kill them with the same shot that they just killed you with. It's superb. But that's actually really, really difficult to do. That takes a lot of time and a lot of experience to be able to like be in a fight, see what somebody does, register what happened in the fight, and then be able to like mimic it. And so really what you're doing in these sort of scenarios when you're trying to learn from an opponent in real time, most of your attention is focused on them, right? Like 70 to 80% of your mental space is on them, on what they're doing. Whereas in contrast, when you're learning, say, the dark side or whatever that you've already kind of are already focused on learning, 80% of your brain space should be on throwing that shot properly, putting, you know, that placement in the correct slot, you know, using it at the right time, so on and so forth. Okay. So as I go on throughout the rest of this, I'm going to focus on more in-depth learning about the first point of, we have a certain shot that we want to learn, a certain concept. How do we really like maximize our time in doing that efficiently? Okay. So there's a couple of things that I want to point out for everyone. Is first off, whenever you're going to try to learn something new, whether it be a concept or a shot or a skill or a tool, make sure that what you're trying to learn is appropriate for your level, right? So if you're a newer fighter, there is no point, I would say, in you trying to learn how to do like combat mechanics or like strategy within a fight if you don't even know like the basic shot mechanics, right? Like, okay, you now have like built out this skill, but you can't do anything with it because your body doesn't have like the mind-muscle connection. You don't have the reflexes, you don't have the response, and you don't have the control to really use that new skill effectively, right? And so this is going to take a little bit of introspection and like thinking about yourself and realizing what you're good at and what you're weak at. And, you know, you could ask your friends, people that you fight with day to day, doing this with like warlords or whomever, upper tier fighters, when you see them at events. You can also learn by taking videos of yourself fighting and sparring new people, and then you can learn by analyzing what you're doing, okay? Also, I want to talk about, so we're going to assume that you already have picked something that is within your skill set, okay? But you also have to be able to understand like how we learn, and have the proper like stress level or stimulus to actually get you to learn properly. So I talked about this concept in my last video, which was last week, so I should remember it. Goal setting. There we go. Took me a second. So the Yerkes-Dodson method, or Yerkes-Dodson curve, which just tells you very simplistically that stress and your performance of growth in learning a new thing are related directly. So if you're in low stress, you have low growth. That's because you're not engaged. If you're in very high stress, you have low growth, and that's because you're overwhelmed. You need a moderate amount of stress, and that's where you're going to have the most amount of learning because you're properly engaged and you're focused on what you're trying to learn, right? So don't overstress yourself when you're trying to learn these new things through fighting, right? So if, for example, say Nameless, who is just up here, you're okay, you can stay. Say Nameless wants to learn whatever, the dark side, right? And it's his first time throwing dark sides or whatever. I would not advise him to try to do that against a warlord, because nothing's like optimized. Like, he's still figuring it out, and so you're never going to land, and it's just too stressful of a situation, and you're never going to get anything out of it, right? So choose your opponents properly. Choose like the concepts properly, and as well as like think about the time frame to use that as like a way to push yourself a little bit. You could say like, all right, I want to learn how to do the dark side in the next 2 weeks. I want to have that like down, right? So then you set this goal. Check out the goal setting video, right? To push yourself to do that. Okay, so understanding of these two things, now we can get into how I would suggest people to learn the most effectively. And so what I like to do is I like to use the Socratic method, right? Ask questions, right? Ask questions before you fight, ask questions after you fight, in every engagement in the fight, right? And so, again, if I'm wanting to learn a new skill, the dark side or the money, I'm mostly focused on trying to land that properly, get that setup correct, right? And after each engagement, I'm going through what went right there, what went wrong, okay? And then once you begin to understand and like recognize a pattern, then you can now say like, oh, I'm not like stepping over enough, or I'm throwing it too soon. Like, my opponent's not even throwing the high cross for the dark side, right? So on and so forth. Asking questions keeps you engaged, and it keeps you focused, at least for me, on what is happening there and then, okay? So the questions that I would ask is, do you understand like the baseline mechanics? Are you doing those mechanics properly, right? What is like the angle? So now, Nameless, you can come up. So we're talking about the dark side. You know, if we're fighting and I keep doing this, and it's not working, I could tilt my sword and I can get now on the inside of the arm. If I step over, I can get on the inside, right? So that simple baseline mechanic and the positioning, are those things right? You know, that will change the difference between me winning and me losing, right? So then, now that you understand that, oh, you can implement it, right? You know, thinking about your accuracy and your position. Is what you're shooting for, are you hitting it? Are you actually hitting where you're wanting to hit? And can you do it consistently? If you can't, you know, if I'm wanting to throw this like cross chop, and I mean, say I want to hit this spot right here, but in reality, my accuracy is bad, and I'm like hitting here, which is very exaggeratory. Maybe you shouldn't be focusing on that, and you should take some time to like pell and drill out your accuracy and like your shot placement. Also thinking about when you're learning different shots, is the setup correct? Is your positioning right? Right. So in context of the dark side, I want Nameless to throw a high cross. How can I get him to throw a high cross? And am I positioned in a correct spot for the high cross to land? Right? So a lot of people love to throw the high cross when they're countered or when they're faced with a high cross. So what do? You high cross, and then you throw, right? Say in that engagement, right? Throw, throw, boom. I get it. Now, that was very exaggerated. Don't extend so much, right? So then, boom. Okay, I didn't get that. So I could change this up in two ways. Just throw the high cross, or yeah, the high cross. I could throw more up, right? I'm tilting my body with it, or, you know, I can step out like I kind of showed earlier. Thinking about those things and recognizing, am I doing this correctly? Does the geometry work out? Those are big ways that you can learn how to throw a shot more properly. Thinking about your defense and the follow-up. All right, say I throw this high cross, or the dark side. Boom, I miss. What is now, where am I open? Yeah, boom. I have to think about that follow-up. So, okay, I miss. Is that going to be how I return? Or say I block. Okay, I missed that, right? Or I could go here. I could come across. What are all the different sort of possibilities that you can now go from there, right? Thinking about what is open every time you throw is going to help you with that follow-up procedure. Because in my experience, whatever you have open is where like 85% of people are going to throw. Because why would they like throw for something? Like, if my board is here, why would Nameless throw for my board side hip? It's already protected. Like, I wouldn't even have to block. So I could just do this. That doesn't make sense for this cross hip shot. It would make sense to go for the thing that's open. Let's see. Also, I would say, like, be creative and think about the unique ways that you can do a single shot. I mean, I kind of already talked a little bit about, like, all right, I can throw the dark side like this. I can throw it like this, where I'm flipping my hand over. I can go up. I can go out. I can step with it, right? You could also combo this in different ways, where I like throw the dark side and then I wrap into a money, right? Like, what are all the different unique ways that you can take a very simple shot and make it super useful, or get something to open up out of that, right? And I think stuff like that is where you will transition from a mid-tier fighter to a high-tier fighter. And you get like more out of the sparring in that way. And then lastly, like, just repetition. You're gonna have to do this again and again to get the mechanics down, but also you're gonna have to do different opponents, because just whatever works with Nameless doesn't mean it's gonna work with Kite or Sean or, you know, some random guy in an event, it's going to be different for every person. And so once you get like a baseline knowledge, then you can like really test the meta of it. As for like, so that's shots specifically. That's kind of how I would go through them. Baseline mechanics, accuracy and precision, your setups and positioning, your defense and your follow-ups, and then being creative and how you can make them unique, and then finally repetition. So next up, now learning like concepts and broad skills, right? So and this extends beyond a single frame, a single shot. So the example that I'm going to talk about is like A range, fighting in A range. A lot of people are super scared of fighting A range. Go check out my video on it. But, right, how do I learn how to do that? Or how do I learn how to do reading? Right? And so, again, this is going to take a lot of mental time. You're going to have to focus on it. And you're going to have to think about similar things that we just talked about with the shots, but in slightly different ways. Right? So with A range, it's going to come down to not just like the setup, but there's like the pre-setup. How do I enter A range? Right? Okay, I can't just step in, right? I can get stabbed. I have to step in a correct way. Also, like if I step in just immediately, my opponent's typically going to step out. I have gotten nowhere. Right? How do I get my opponent to commit to staying where they are, or how do I catch them off step? Okay, so now once you figure that out, and it's going to be different again for everybody. You know, the way that Nameless is going to respond to me trying to get into A range is going to be very different than, you know, anybody else. We're all unique. Okay, so just come a little bit, make sure you're in frame. So like, say I'm here, now what? I've gotten into A range, right? What is available? What is open? You know, I could come in, say thank you for opening it up more, right? Maybe I can get over, but also, again, think about the defense. What's going to be juicy for Nameless to now get on me, right? If I throw this and I miss, right, all he has to do is tilt. I'm armed, right? How does this grind work? You're going to have to take it very piecewise, and it's going to be kind of different for every sort of topic that you're going to work with. And then also, like, now say I'm here, how do I disengage? You know, if Nameless is the aggressor and wants to be in A range, most people are going to continue to press, right? So like, how do I stay out? How do I get him to back off? You know, can I arm him? Do I leg him and leave him out? Stuff like that. And for a lot of these things, I would go through the individual videos that I've talked about or that I've put up for these things, and try to build a plan to identify like what the key points of each skill are, and then try to focus on those. And I think that will help a lot, right? In terms of reading, I would say every time you walk up on an opponent, see what their body is telling you, right? How is their positioning? You know, how is their stance? Where's their guard? So on and so forth. Go through the engagement and then see if you can recognize any patterns on what they're doing. What is your opponent's like 6 most common shots? Once you understand that, you can now kind of like build an entire plan of assessing how to beat them, so on and so forth, right? It's just going to take repetition, and it takes time to learn these things. But being engaged and being focused and like actively learning on what that big skill is will make it more effective. Also, try to incorporate this thing with other things once you get comfortable. Like once you're pretty confident, you know, you have a decent baseline of how reading works, how to fight A range. Like, all right, how do I incorporate that in a more organic way within my fighting style? Okay. So now I would say that kind of covers fighting to learn. I think the biggest thing is make sure that you have the right stress level, keep things at the appropriate level that you're trying to, or that you're at. And then just continue to ask yourself questions and be engaged while you're doing the fighting. Okay. Now I want to talk about fighting to win, right? Everybody wants to win because it feels good. But I would say fighting to win is a little bit different than fighting to learn. I know I said in the beginning that these should be kind of the same thing, or can be. But really, like, in the context of this video or this class, like, fighting to win is increasing the probability of success, and really testing your skills at the maximum capacity, like at the hottest and heaviest point. Like, I would kind of think about this in terms of like the tournament fights, right? That is highest stakes. You win or you lose. Like, you go on or you're kicked out. Okay. And so really fighting to win, this is where I sit as a warlord most of the time. I am doing real-time problem solving every single fight, right? I'm taking in all of this information that my opponent is showing me, right? I'm reading. I'm trying to maximize success. I'm putting in all of these things that I've talked about in my Newb to Warlord series, reading how my opponent is, understanding all of the fights that we've had previously. How tall is my opponent? How aggressive are they? How defensive are they? How much do they like to back out? How much, like, all of this stuff I'm trying to fit together to increases my chances, right? And so I'm trying to set traps. I'm trying to put smokes and mirrors. And so kind of how do I do that, right? Like, let's see. Yeah. So looking at your common shots, picking up on patterns is like really important, because most fighters have ticks or have tendencies to do the same things, especially when they're in that super high stakes situation. if you say Nameless, I'm just going to pick on you a little bit, right? Say Nameless really likes to throw a high cross, and if I get like, everybody has an oh shit spam button, and if the high cross is Nameless's oh shit spam button, and I can get that response and I can learn that, oh man, I'm going to abuse it, right? I'm going to threaten Nameless in whatever way, boom, and take advantage of it. That's a great opportunity for you to learn and for you to win. Also, looking at their combos, looking at their body position. Again, I've like put out a bunch of videos on all of these different things. I would specifically recommend looking at my combat computer class, the combat assessments class, the adaptation, and the positioning class, right? Where, just in very brief, I'm going to go through this very briefly. And when I'm trying to win, I am reading very, very heavily. This, I think, is one of the most important skills that any fighter can have, especially when they're trying to transition from mid-tier to high tier. Because if I can read and assess what my opponent is doing, like, what is their body telling me, then I can build a plan, right? So from this angle, right, Nameless is sword or board foot forward. That means that hip is the closest thing to me, right? That's going to be the easiest target that I can actually hit. Since Nameless has a dome shield, it's going to be really hard for me to wrap over, right? I'm like going, like, don't even move it. Okay, now I can get it. Now I can't, right? And I'm throwing with a little bit of oomph, right? But thinking about that, right? And so once I kind of know where my opponent is in this sort of position, what strategy can I try to do? Does my opponent ever like try to stance shift forward? Does Nameless ever bring that hip forward? If he does, how can I get it, right? Because like, if I can get that hit forward, that's the most exposed item in like a board v board option, right? So how can I get that to work? And then trying to build a plan out of all of this information. How can I, get him to move that hip forward? Or if I want to go for, say, the board side hip, how can I get that board to shift up so I can scoop in, right? And so I like to think about this as like trying to build a model for every single person, right? You try to collect data, you try to understand what they're doing, what their ticks are, and then you then try to execute on that. Now, at the high tier fights, you're going to have to be a little cautious because your opponent is actively trying to do the same thing to you, right? They're trying to give you bad data, and that's where like the fakes are coming in and the body feints and the baits. And so they're trying to give you bad data so they can get you in a trap. And you're also trying to do that to them, right? So you have to be a little bit wary of those sort of things. But then, at the end of the day, you just kind of try to execute it and see what happens. And then, since we're not like doing SCA and getting gassed out really, really fast, you can do like 100 reps in 10 minutes or something like that. If you're like really grindy. But yeah, that's kind of all I have. Hopefully that was helpful in at least some capacity. But thank you to everybody for your attention. Thank you, Nameless, for letting me pick on you and being my dummy for the day. And I look forward to seeing you on my next Newb to Warlord video. Thanks, guys.